If your team isn't fully bought into your company's mission, if they're frequently missing deadlines, showing up with energy in meetings, or quiet quitting, it's probably not because you have a mission problem. I'm willing to bet, based on my decades of experience working with Fortune 500 companies, that it's actually a communication problem. Your beautifully crafted mission statement might be framed up on a wall, but when your sales team can't articulate it to customers, when your product team isn't using it to guide decisions, and when your new hires forget it a week after onboarding, it simply isn't working. And it's often not working because your team doesn't fully understand or buy into it, not because it's necessarily a bad mission. In this video, I'm going to show you the 4-step framework we've used with Fortune 500 companies to completely flip the script, communicating company vision in a way that it actually inspires an organization, so team members know and understand the mission, and most importantly, they see themselves in it, so they live the mission out in their effort and let it guide their work. So let's get into it. The first thing you need to do is stop looking at your mission as a statement and start seeing it as a story. The organizations with the strongest cultures, they don't just declare their mission, they tell it. Charity Water is a perfect example. Scott Harrison doesn't just explain what they do, he shares his story. Let's take a look.
My name is Scott Harrison.
Just listen.
This is my wife, my son, and my one on the way. I lead an organization called Charity Water, and our mission is to bring clean water to everyone on the planet. I live in New York City now, but I didn't always. I grew up in suburbia, and this was my house. My dad was a businessman, and my mom was a writer. They loved each other, and they loved me. We were a happy family. Until we weren't.
Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with water? The answer, believe it or not, is everything. Scott's personal arc of redemption has become the emotional foundation of Charity Water's mission. It invites people into something bigger than a nonprofit, and instead invites them into a journey of transformation. His, theirs, and the millions of lives they're trying to change. That's the difference between a mission people hear and a mission they feel. So how do you do this? Here's a simple framework to help you structure your mission like a story. First things first, start with the beginning. And not just the business beginning, but the human one. This is where you set the scene. What was broken? What wasn't working? What needed to change? Not just in your industry, but in the day-to-day life people were experiencing. Now let's look at how Scott Harrison does this.
When I was 4 years old, my mom collapsed on the bedroom floor. We'd just moved into a new house, and our house had a carbon monoxide gas leak, but none of us knew it until then. She didn't die that day, but her immune system did. She became allergic to everything. Perfume, the ink from books, radio waves. She wore strange masks all the time and was often connected to oxygen. The toxic gas destroyed her immune system, and in a way, my childhood too. After the poisoning, our roles reversed, and I began to take care of her. As the only child, I had to be a good one. I learned to cook, do laundry, and take care of the house. I was a good Christian kid who played piano in church and wanted to be a doctor when I grew up to help sick people like her. Until I turned 18.
He doesn't lead with the mission or the metrics. He starts with a personal moment and shares that from a young age, he saw suffering up close and how that suffering planted a seed. That's the true beginning of Charity Water and the moment his worldview cracked open. After that, move through the middle. The middle is where things get hard. It's the moment of tension and conflict where values were tested and choices had to be made. This is what gives your mission weight. Without tension, there's no meaning, and without a challenge, there's no room for transformation. So let's see how Scott talks about his middle.
Music was my escape, so I joined a band and moved to New York.
Right about the time when the band broke up, I got involved in producing these live music shows in the city.
I realized that you could actually get paid
in New York City to drink alcohol for free. This job was called a nightclub promoter. So you just had to get beautiful people in the clubs, and if you got the right people in the clubs, you could charge guys $500 to buy a bottle of champagne that cost you $40. I moved from club to club to club, filling up the VIP section and flashing my Rolex to the club photographers. For almost 10 years after that, I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day and was out drunk almost every night. I was into strip clubs, gambling, and just about every drug except heroin.
The middle is messy. Scott was surrounded by excess, status, and everything that he thought would bring fulfillment. But instead of feeling more alive, he felt more empty. That tension is what ultimately pushed him to walk away from it all. Now, your middle may not be dramatic, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be true. Then, end it with meaning. A great ending doesn't just resolve the story, it reveals insight. Something changed and clicked. The way you operate today is a direct result of what happened then. For Scott, that moment came when he left the clubs behind and volunteered aboard a hospital ship off the coast of Liberia.
I realized I was spiritually bankrupt, I was emotionally bankrupt, I was certainly morally bankrupt. I tried to find my way back to a very lost faith. I wanted things to be different. I left nightlife, sold almost everything I owned, and decided to take 1 year off to try serving others instead of myself. I'm filling out these long applications for these very credible humanitarian organizations that have long histories. I put in the applications and then I wait. And I guess I should not have been surprised, but I am denied by all of these organizations. They won't even let me volunteer because of my past. So they're like, what do you do again? We're serious people. Thankfully, one organization says, if you pay us $500 a month, you can volunteer with us. So I said, here are my credit card details. Where are you guys going? They were an amazing team of doctors and surgeons who traveled the world on a hospital ship. They specialized in removing facial tumors, and they were going to Liberia, one of the poorest countries in the world, and a country I'd never even heard of. I say, I'm gonna sign up and be your volunteer photojournalist. I'd always taken pretty good pictures and photos and loved telling stories. Everything in my life changed. I decided in one fell swoop to kind of never smoke again, to never touch drugs again, to never gamble again, to swear off pornography and strip clubs, and I needed to walk so far in the other direction. And I walked up this gangway, and this became my new home.
For the first time, he wasn't chasing status, he was serving. He saw suffering up close, but he also saw what it looked like to be part of something bigger than himself. That turning point became the emotional engine of Charity Water. It gave the mission depth and direction. That's the power of story. It creates meaning people can carry. You might not be running a nonprofit or have a story that spans continents, but if you're trying to shift your culture or inspire belief, then you need more than a message. You need a narrative that's grounded in real emotion. Don't just write your mission. Shape it. Give it a beginning, a middle, an end, and then share it in a way that helps your team see the journey for what it really is. A story that they can step into. But at some point, you have to move beyond telling your story. You need to start telling your team's story. Too often, leaders unconsciously cast themselves or their company as the hero in presentations and meetings. But making your team the hero of the story is a shift that unlocks influence. When your people see themselves at the center of the mission, they're going to engage deeper, take ownership faster, and push it further. So how do you communicate like that? Start with reframing your language. Often we use egocentric language without even realizing it. We might say things like, I had an idea, or I'm proud of what I delivered. And none of this is coming from a place of arrogance. It's just how many of us have been taught to speak as leaders. But when we speak like that, we place ourselves at the center of the story. And every time you do that, you're unintentionally nudging your team right out of the spotlight. So instead of saying something like, I'm proud of what we delivered, try something like, what this team accomplished took real grit and follow through. It's a subtle shift, but it creates a massive difference in how your team perceives their role. Now you're saying, this happened because of you. The next thing you can do to make your team the hero is shift the spotlight. Think about your last few meetings. Be honest, how many of them included recognition and celebration of your people? There's an easy fix, and it's as simple as baking recognition into the rhythm of your meetings. Kick off with something like, before we dive in, I want to shout out what the team pulled off this week. And end it with something like, does anyone want to share what they're proud of during this sprint? This doesn't have to add 30 minutes onto every meeting. It can take 5. But over time, that 5-minute habit becomes part of your culture. People start anticipating it and they listen for it. They begin to expect and hear great work called out, which means they start looking for ways to create it. You're developing a team that sees themselves as high-performing, resilient, and mission-critical because that's what you've told them they are. This doesn't require a complete communication overhaul. You just need to make a series of subtle shifts in how you speak, how you listen, and how you hero your team. Because when people believe they are central to the mission, they behave like they are. And that's when your mission stops being a beautiful statement on a poster and become something your team carries with them. Of course, at some point, words stop working. And that's okay, it's normal. Logic and language can only take us so far. To truly inspire people, you need to create experiences. And this is where rituals and symbols come in. I've seen this pattern over and over again. The most transformational leaders don't just say what's changing. They mark it and they shape how people experience it. When you weave speeches, stories, and ceremonies and symbols together, you create something deeper than alignment. You create belief. Let me walk you through what this can look like. First, yes, deliver the speech, but don't just read the lines. Speak from the place inside you where the connection lives. The moment you knew this was the right direction, the experience that shaped your thinking, or the doubt you had to push through. That's the version people remember. And then keep telling stories that make it stick. When someone on your team lives out a value in a way that surprises you or makes you proud, tell that story. And then tell it again. And then encourage your team to tell it too. The more we retell these moments, the more we solidify what our mission actually is. Don't underestimate the power of ceremony. Ceremonies help us mark transitions. They say, this moment matters. Steve Jobs once held a funeral on stage for an operating system. He literally put the old Mac OS in a coffin and delivered a eulogy. Dramatic? Yes. But no one ever forgot that it was time to move on. And finally, symbols. Symbols are powerful because they don't require explanation. They bypass logic and go straight to emotion. At Duarte, we have a little giraffe statue. And it started off as a one-off thank you gift and evolved into a ritual. Now, when someone goes above and beyond, they're called out at our staff meeting and given a giraffe-formation. And let me tell you, people light up, not because of the giraffe, but because they've been seen. You don't need to invent symbols, rituals, or ceremonies from scratch. Just ask, what are we already doing that feels meaningful? Then amplify it and give it structure. This creates a shortcut to shared meaning because it goes beyond logic and straight to emotion. Now, if you really want storytelling to shape your culture, you've got to build it into your operations. You can't rely on a single story or a single voice to carry the weight of your mission. It doesn't work that way. Stories are living things and they need structure to survive. I recommend every organization builds what we call a storytelling system. This is a set of internal tools, habits, and spaces that help your people tell the stories that matter. One of my favorite storytelling systems is a walking deck. This is a scalable presentation full of bite-sized stories, origin moments, and value examples that any employee can use when talking about your company. Whether it's onboarding a new hire or meeting with a new customer, they're walking around with a clear way to represent your mission. If you don't have a walking deck, start there, because this gives people the language to carry your story forward. But a storytelling system goes beyond decks. You need people who act as an internal culture keeper. These are people who notice the stories hiding in the corners of your organization and make sure they're not lost. These people are your corporate folklorist. But of course, this doesn't need to be a formal title, but it does need to be a formal function. Start by asking who on your team is already collecting these moments. who is naturally attuned to the human side of work. That's who you give permission to gather and share the lore, and then you make it part of your rhythm. You can start doing this by collecting stories intentionally. Set up a simple intake form, create a story channel in your internal messaging platform, or even start a shared document where people can jot down meaningful moments. You'd be amazed at how many powerful stories are hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be noticed. Look for emotional turning points when your people tell their stories. Not every story has to be epic, but it does need contrast, something that shifted. So when someone's sharing a recap of a project or a win, ask, what was hard about it? What surprised you? What would you do differently next time? That's often where the story lives. And make sure you create space to tell stories. Build storytelling into your all-staff meetings, onboarding sessions, even the team huddles. At Duarte, we invite different teams to stand up, tell stories about times they embodied one of our values. It doesn't have to be polished. It just has to be real. So take the time to build that system. Give people the tools and prompts and permission to tell stories that matter. Because when storytelling becomes part of your organization and how it operates, that's when the mission becomes real. We've covered quite a bit together because at the end of the day, sustaining belief is never about one big speech. It's about the small, consistent signals that reinforce who you are, what you value, and where you're headed. That's what creates a mission people want to be part of. Now, if you're leading your team through change or even just thinking about how to guide them through uncertainty, I'd encourage you to keep going with us. We've got a video that dives deeper into how to communicate change in a way that earns trust, creates momentum, and helps people stay connected through every twist and turn of the journey ahead. And you can watch it right over here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you there.